Meanwhile, time for us to turn our attention to yet another story that might, I don't know, may or may not make your blood boil. The minister who has led the introduction of Wales's new 20-mile-an-hour speed limit will now face a Conservative vote of no confidence. Next week's motion against Deputy Climate Change Minister Lee Waters focuses on the record number of signatures on a petition opposing the new lower limit, which has now topped 380,000. I just wonder whether 20-mile-an-hour limits are a good idea. I understand and I accept. If you've got a school, great idea. If you've got a small, narrow lane, which is a residential property, doesn't really go anywhere, it's where people live, again, I totally understand. And I think if you had those small areas, it really works. But for the rest of the roads, it's bonkers, bonkers, bonkers. Renee, do you agree with me?
Absolutely, 100%. Look, I think the states do this well. People know that when there's roadworks and the limit goes down, if they speed in there, they are going to be hit with a fine. People know that when they go past a school, they have to stick to the reduced limit. So they follow it. What we need is the same here. This is crazy. I was driving in London the other day, in the middle of the day, unusually Park Lane on the side that still has 3 lanes, didn't have much traffic, and I had to do 20 miles an hour. It was actually hard, and I spent the entire time looking at my speedometer.
It is absolutely ridiculous. Anyway, let's see if we can get some expertise into the conversation. Quentin Wilson, motoring journalist and legend, joined us now. Quentin, good morning.
Morning, James.
Thank you so much for joining us here on Talk. It's really appreciated. As far as I'm concerned, I'm exasperated that we've allowed 20-mile-an-hour limits to happen pretty much everywhere, almost without any say. Is there any justification other than outside schools or perhaps small residential streets?
Look, I completely agree that, it's proportionate. So you've got to have it in residential areas where there is a danger to vulnerable pedestrians. And as you say, schools, hospitals, care homes, some residential streets. But to have a default blanket 20-mile-an-hour speed limit on residential roads, as they've mooted in Wales, is crazy. And the problem here is that, yes, it does absolutely reduce the risk of what's known as KSI, killed or serious injuries, on a 20-mile-an-hour impact compared to a 30-mile-an-hour impact. But there have been studies by Bristol University and Cambridge University particularly that said that it doesn't really reduce accidents that much. It's not statistically significant. So we need to look at this and say, let's do it by individual road. The default idea is no good because it's clearly not taking people with us. So if you want a road safety initiative that is good, and these are laudable aspirations, it has to be said, we can't have a situation where you've got 380,000 people signing a petition and a vote of no confidence in the minister who's proposed the idea. So let's take the public with us. Let's look at each individual road, and if there is a vulnerability to pedestrians, then put the 20 on. Absolutely.
Where do you stand, Quentin, though, on speed limits in general? For example, at one stage we were going to have a government that recognised that maybe 70 miles an hour on our motorways wasn't particularly sensible, and perhaps we should do what many European nations do, which is when the weather is fine, you can go 85, and when it's not, you go a little bit slower at sort of 65. When are we going to have that conversation? That the technology is there, people say, oh, it's so difficult to understand. No, it's not. It's really easy to have the signs. The technology works really well. When are we going to have sensible and proportionate speed limits as opposed to this doctrine that seems to just be punishing the motorist?
When you've got a government that understands about driving and cars and speed limits and all these nuanced things, and we haven't got that. We've got people in transport who do history degrees. The 70 mile an hour speed limit, as imposed by Barbara Castle all those years ago, the problem is if you raise that, James, to 80, because people do sort of 80, 85 now, don't they? And there are no cops. There's no traffic cops out there, which is another problem.
There are cameras.
Yeah, but not on motorways and things. And I don't believe in remote policing at all. I think you've got to have cops. They're mobile, they're visible, they're currency, everybody understands. If you raise that to 85, then people are going to do 90, 95, aren't they? So if you really do want to have a sensible speed limit, again, you've got to have a proper debate. You've got to have, all the evidence that says, look, that this won't increase road casualties, it will reduce it. And on the argument in Wales that it's going to be climate climate helping and slowing people down means less emissions, wouldn't it be a better thing to have incentives for electric car drivers, like, free electric car parking anywhere in Wales, free use of bus lanes if you've got an electric car? Again, we need some really nuanced, clever thinking on this. Otherwise, you're going to lose the public on road safety, as we've lost them on air quality with you, Les.
Yeah, hi Quentin, it's Renee. I think it's really interesting that you just made the link to climate there, because I was also reading some data this week that shows that when cars are idling at 20 miles an hour, they're actually producing more emissions than when they're going at 30 miles an hour. So it seems to me that when you look at data like that and you look at what's happened in London, for example, where cars are permanently idling now, it's nothing to do with air quality, it's just to do with money.
Renee, your analogy about Park Lane, I go down there regularly, as clearly you do as well. And it's now just a pollution hotspot, whereas it didn't used to be. So we really do need to have somebody in charge here who understands these nuances. And like, you put a speed bump in, and then that actually makes more pollution at that point, because the car has to slow down, brake dust, then accelerate away. So let's employ the science and understand what is good for the environment.
But is it that, as you rightly say, they must have this data? There's no way that they're putting these laws in place without the data. So are they just choosing to ignore it because it's more profitable for them to actually do so?
I'm not sure we can go with, this is a money-raising scam. That's, I think, a conspiracy theory. What we can argue, I think, quite convincingly, is that it's kind of incompetence. We don't have the right people being consulted about this, and we saw this with Sunak and his U-turn on 2030. Have proper experts, and not people who don't drive electric cars telling us that we shouldn't buy electric cars. People who understand road safety. There are loads and loads of experts out there. There's loads and loads of research. But all of a sudden we have a government that is now claiming to be motoring friendly. But for as long as I've been talking and broadcasting and writing about cars, they've always been absolutely anti-motorist. And this whole backlog of silly initiatives is because we haven't had that kind of science applied to the
And isn't all of this going to be exacerbated, Quentin, that, for example, in 2025, a lot of the incentives to have electric cars will go? One of the reasons, I've never been a particular advocate of going electric because of the environment. I go electric because it's much cheaper. And the second it becomes just as expensive, then I might think of other means. That at the moment, there are all sorts of incentives to have an electric car. The government haven't done enough good jobs to help people make that choice. Until or unless they do and commit to it, then guess what? People are not going to do it.
No, absolutely. And I mean, that speech, Rishi Sunak, it was a golden opportunity to say we'll cut the VAT on public charging from 20% to 5% in line with domestic. And I've been campaigning for that for the last 2 years, but he didn't. So, this lack of correct scientific advice will risk the whole electrification transition, the whole energy transition, EVs, and again, apply that to the 20-mile-an-hour speed limit in Wales, and then we lose all public sympathy for any road safety initiatives. And that's the long-term unintended consequences, the tragedy of all this.
Who's doing more damage, though, to road users? Because on one hand, you say Rishi Sunak and his idiotic policies that seem to make no sense, but then on the other hand, Wales, it's a Welsh Labour who have imposed the 20-mile-an-hour limit, and London, with you, Les, it's Sadiq Khan and his lot. I mean, they're all as bad as each other. I'm just trying to work out who's the motorist friend here.
There isn't one, and there never has been. And this is the result of this huge congestion, of this huge £12 billion backlog in road repairs, the fact that we haven't built enough roads, that the whole country is creaking in terms of congestion and pollution. And this is a legacy because no government has really taken this and said we're going to do something with it and make the country flow proper. I mean, look, it's all about GDP, it's all about productivity, it's all about not wasting time being stuck on Park Lane in that huge traffic jam that happens several times a day.
It is absolutely extraordinary, Quentin. Thank you very much indeed for joining us this morning. That's Quentin Wilson, motoring journalist and arguably legend in the world of motoring. Thank you so much for speaking to us this morning here on Talk. Look, I think, why is it, Renee, that you know, we just need some common sense when it comes to making these decisions. I'm not for, you know, having dangerous roads or dangerous driving, you know, and I want people to stick by rules, and I want to make sure that, you know, if you're a pedestrian, you're not going to have the risk of it. But I think sometimes when you put in a rule like 20 miles an hour, you're actually making it more dangerous because people totally ignore it and they drive at 40, 50.
Yeah, and I mean, I live on a small residential road where people regularly speed down there at speeds you couldn't imagine. I've lost cats to that road, but one day... Yeah, my cats get run over on my little road.
How many cats have you got?
Well, I've had several run over along the way. Yes. But, you know, one more important to me, as much as I love my pets, is that there are children in that road. And that's what I look at them and I think that could have been a child. You know, so yes, I agree with you. But, you know, I've driven in London since I was 18, which was a very, very, very long time ago. And things are just getting worse and worse. And I don't see that it's making any difference to air quality or anything like that. I think that lots of this is virtual signalling as well.
I couldn't agree with you more. I think you speak as you hear it and see it, and it's common sense.